Right. So this is our concluding uh, lecture on postmodernism and consumer society. Till now, we have dealt with a few very important issues uh, that are discussed in this essay. The writer in this essay tries to deal with the cultural phenomena of postmodernism and tries to give us a detailed account of postmodern culture and postmodern tendencies. Basically, the essay is an attempt to enumerate the characteristics of postmodern culture. Okay. Uh, there is an essay titled Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, which is on the same subject, but it is much more detailed and it takes up the issue of postmodernism in a greater detail. Okay. This is I would say a rather simpler and a very and a rather abridged account of the same ideas that are there in postmodernism or the cultural logic of late capitalism. So, yes. So, till now we have seen that postmodernism is described as a phase in our cultural life which seems to follow modernism. So there are a few things which can be seen as a continuation of modernism. There are other things which are not a continuation but a reaction against modernism. So if we say the same thing in other words, we can say that postmodernism can be understood both as an extension, as an intensification, and as a reaction against modernism. Some people do not accept this term. There is a lot of skepticism surrounding this term. Okay. I will take this issue when we have finished discussing the essay. Okay. There are views that this kind of an understanding of postmodernism is elitist. Okay. It deals with or it basically affects only the upper strata of the society, and the lower strata is still untouched by any such thing called postmodernism. So, I mean, many things related with postmodernism cannot be taken at face value. There is lot of disagreement and dispute about whether what people like Jameson or theorists like Jameson say is acceptable or not. Now, coming back to the point and coming back to our essay, as I have said, that today we will be dealing with the last part of this essay, which tries to understand postmodernism in terms of schizophrenia. So today our subject will be postmodernism and schizophrenia. How are the two related? How are the two related? What is schizophrenia? And how does it apply to postmodern culture? How does it become an important postmodern tendency according to Jameson? Jameson has already said in the earlier part of this essay that postmodern culture is an effacement of so many things related with our past. The effacement of the difference between high culture and low culture, the emergence of theory, okay, which is a blend of all the academic discipline and which has claims it as its right to take material from every other academic discipline uh, without without restricting itself, okay, and subjecting itself to academic boundaries and to uh, academic distinctions. So without distinctions, theory is now, and I have already said that this essay is also an example of theory. Now, theory is is a kind of writing that borrows from history, that borrows from political science, that borrows from literature, that borrows from cultural studies, and it claims it as its right to you know give an expression to views on all these areas. So at one and the same time, it is all these things put together. So Jameson tries to describe postmodern and understand postmodernism in terms of uh, the effacements of the high and low culture, the emergence of mass culture, okay, the right of every kind of work of art to stake a claim to the status of art. Every work of art now can stake a claim to the place, to the status of art. One. Two, we have already discussed this, that he in this essay spends a lot of, devotes a lot of time to looking at postmodernism in terms of pastiche. Okay? Now, he says all cultural productions taking place in this phase of our cultural experience are examples of pastiche. Pastiche is a copy. Okay? So we are living at other places. Jameson uses the term surfaces, that it is a society which transacts in surfaces. We seem to have given up. We seem to have abjured depth models, okay? Depth models of interpretation, depth models of language, depth models of social life, and depth models of the understanding of existence. Okay, so the same thing applies to Roland Barthes' essay "Death of the Author," and the same thing applies to the Jameson's idea that the sense of personal self, okay, has also been lost as part of our cultural experience. Now, one thing which I will be taking up later on is related with the question whether there has been a radical and drastic transformation of the society. Jameson himself says that this is not correct. Okay, these tendencies may have been present in the earlier times also, but in the present times, these tendencies have become very dominant. They have become dominant. They have become the defining features of our cultural life and our cultural experience. Now, in the last part of the essay, which is quite interesting, okay, he takes the term schizophrenia, which is a term borrowed from psychology and psychiatry. Okay? Schizophrenic is a schizophrenic individual is someone who suffers from split personality. Okay? Someone who does not have a sense of self that we people have. Okay? If we can, consider ourselves to be either less or uh, or less schizophrenic, or we consider ourselves to not to be schizophrenic at all. Okay? But according to Jameson, schizophrenia has become integral to human subjectivity today. Human consciousness is constituted in such a way that schizophrenia can be detected in almost every uh, human subjectivity, and it is now inextricably linked with human consciousness. This is what he says. So what I mean is that it is a term borrowed from psychology and from psychiatry. Yeah, schizophrenia is, if you know if you try to find the meaning of this term, you will find that it is a kind of madness, a kind of insanity, okay, where the mind loses its ability to perceive the self as a unified self, or a independent consciousness. So that sense has been lost. This is the first meaning of schizophrenia. I want to turn to what I see as the second basic feature of postmodernism. This is the line with which the section begins. I now want to turn to what I see as the second basic feature of postmodernism, namely its peculiar way with time, which one could call textuality or a creature, but which I have found it useful to discuss in terms of the current theories of schizophrenia. So he says that the second basic feature of postmodernism after pastiche is schizophrenia. And then he quickly tries to dispel some possible misconceptions that can arise in our minds as a result of the use of the term schizophrenia. Because I have said schizophrenia is a kind of mental disorder. So Jameson says that I am not using this term in this sense. Okay? So he dispels these misconceptions right at the outset. I hasten to forestall any number of possible misconceptions about the use of this word. It is meant to be descriptive and not diagnostic. So he makes it clear right at the outset that for me, schizophrenia is not a disease. It's not a disease. I am using this term, I am making use of this term as a descriptive term. So, which would imply that I am not very far indeed from believing, I am very far indeed from believing that any of the most significant postmodernist artists, John Cage, John Ashbery, Philip Sollers, Robert Wilson, Andy Warhol, Ishmael Reed, etc., are in any sense schizophrenics. So he makes this very clear that for me, postmodernist artists are not schizophrenics in the sense that they suffer from some mental illness, because in that case you would not take postmodernist art seriously. If postmodernist art is described as the art produced by people who are abnormal, it will become abnormal art. Jameson is not saying anything of that kind. He's saying that I am using this term as a descriptive term and not a diagnostic term. I am not trying to conduct a diagnosis about the mental health of these writers and these artists. Second important point. I will be dividing this into three parts. One, how does he use the term schizophrenia, which I have already discussed with you, that he uses it as descriptive and not diagnostic. Okay. Then, second is that he basically borrows from Lacanian psychoanalysis. The term is borrowed from Lacanian psychoanalysis. There are 2-3 things linked with the Lacanian conception of schizophrenia. okay, which I will be dealing with you. And after that, he basically tries to apply the Lacanian conception of schizophrenia to culture and art and to human experience. So this is how we go about it. Schizophrenia, one, as a descriptive term, then Lacanian conception of schizophrenia. What is it? Because he borrows from Lacanian conception. Jacques Lacan, he's a French psychoanalyst, and there are some specific assumptions in Lacanian use of schizophrenia, which he uses to build his argument. And then he applies Lacanian conception of schizophrenia to human experience, to postmodernist art. Now, we have already noted in the earlier part that Jameson believes that the sense of personal self, the unique identity, okay, which was the most common way of perceiving ourselves, has been replaced by something else. So, the term schizophrenia is also an answer to that. That what has the earlier sense of personal self, which was so important in our perception of ourselves, because according to Jameson, this sense of personal self was basically a bourgeois idea. It was an idea which was produced in social circumstances dominated by the bourgeois or the middle classes. So it was a very middle class idea. It was an ideology rather than something transcendental, something which was inherently present in human nature. Okay, there was a phase when we started, or we learned to look at ourselves as individuals. Before that, that was not the case. In the medieval and in the prehistoric times, individualism was not the norm. It became a norm during the modern times. And Roland Barthes also says that author, the figure of the author, emerges during the industrial phase. It was an outcome of industrial capitalism, when personal self and individualism became. Now, what does this sense of self get replaced by in the postmodern times? Schizophrenia is an answer to this. Now, the second part, he says, I am not even sure that the view of schizophrenia I am about to outline, a view largely developed in the work of French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, is clinically accurate, but that doesn't matter for my purposes. So, a view largely developed in the work of French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan. He says, I am making use of this concept. The concept of Lacan's concept of schizophrenia. Now, the originality of Lacan, so coming to Lacanian conception of schizophrenia, because he builds his argument, or he develops his ideas by using this model given by Lacan. Now, there are three things in the Lacanian model of schizophrenia. One, that schizophrenia is a language disorder, or a failure to access language as a system of signs and symbols. One, what is schizophrenia according to Lacan? It is now he will apply these two later on to our own experience. That how do we become schizophrenic in his understanding of postmodernism. So in Lacanian conception of schizophrenia, schizophrenia is described as a language disorder, the failure to access or acquire language as a system of signs and symbols. So the originality of Lacan's thought in this area is to have considered schizophrenia essentially as a language disorder and to have linked schizophrenic experience to a whole view of language acquisition as the fundamental missing link in the Freudian conception of the formation of the mature self. So, in Lacan's view, our social experience involves access to language. Our consciousness is constituted, according to Lacan, now this is purely Lacanian ideas, that our consciousness gets constituted when we acquire language as a system of signs, as a symbolic system, because language is a symbolic system which has basically three components. Now let us come to those three components. One, language as a symbolic order that helps constitute our consciousness as social beings. Okay. Language as a symbolic order that helps constitute our consciousness as social beings. Basically the idea is that our consciousness, our existence and our experience of our social life basically depends on the acquisition of language. So language is primary in this model of human consciousness. Language is primary. Language is prior to life. It is prior to the sense of self. It is prior to consciousness. Okay. First we enter the symbolic order of language, and then we become conscious of the self and of the external realities. Schizophrenia is a language disorder where this kind of thing doesn't happen. Now, but there are more things involved in acquisition of language. What are they? One, language as a symbolic order, as a symbolic system, language as a system per se, okay, is associated with the idea of time, because we all know that whether there is how past and present, okay, are understood, how past and present are assimilated by us, are understood by us, basically is linked with our experience of language also, because language introduces us to the notion of past, present and future. Yes, past, present and future are concepts which exist outside language also, but according to Lacan, okay, we to a great extent we learn the distinctions between past, present and future through acquisition of language, by accessing language, by getting initiated into the symbolic system of language. So one is the notion of time. Then in the Lacanian system, a linguistic sign, now this is a little technical, please bear with me, I will try to be as simple as possible. A linguistic sign, because language is a system of signs which are arbitrary. We all know that the term pen does not have anything much to do with this. Okay, what happens is that the term pen or the word cat, okay, there are three levels: signifier, signified, and referent. which through which the sign operates, the linguistic sign operates. The linguistic sign consists of three components. One is the signifier, second is the signified, third is the referent. Now, the word pen, the word pen, the word pen, P-E-N and P-E-N, in written and spoken form is the signifier, by which we mean that it is the written or the spoken form in which this term acquires its material form, in which it comes into existence. We can write it, we can speak it. That is the signifier. Signified is the concept of pen. The pen is an instrument. Cat is an animal. The term cat, CAT, is the signifier. What is the signified? Signified is the concept. The concept of the cat. Concept of the pen. Pen is an instrument with which we write. Now, the idea of the pen is different from the real pen. The real pen is the referent. There are three things: the signifier, the written and the spoken form, in which a term acquires its material form, the signified, which is the concept, the idea, and third is the referent. Referent is the real pen or the real cat, जो आपको कहीं भी चलती फिरती दिख सकती है. पेन, जहाँ जैसे 10 तरह के पेन यहाँ पे आपको मिल जाएंगे, है ना, ये सारे ही पेन हैं ना. All of them are pens. They are not very identical also. They have different shapes and sizes, but all of them fit into the idea of the pen, the concept of the pen. So three things: signifier, signified, and referent. Now in these three things, one thing is least important, and that is the referent. सबसे कम इम्पॉर्टेंट अगर कोई टर्म है इन तीनों में से, वो रेफरेंट है, क्योंकि एक्चुअली लैंग्वेज ऑपरेट्स एंड फंक्शंस थ्रू द इंटरप्ले ऑफ द सिग्निफाइड एंड सिग्निफायर. ये दूसरी बात है जो लाकान की थ्योरी में आती है कि लैंग्वेज बेसिकली ऑपरेट्स, बेसिकली लैंग्वेज प्रोड्यूसेस मीनिंग. लैंग्वेज प्रोड्यूसेस मीनिंग. लैंग्वेज इज एसोसिएटेड विद मीनिंग. नाउ, according to Lacan, as far as meaning is concerned, referent is not important. What is important? The interplay of the signifier and the signified. And third thing, most important thing, is that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is not a stable relationship. How? The signified constantly gets renewed. I will explain it to you by giving you a few examples. Very simple. Signified constantly gets modified and renewed, because of which the relationship between the signified and the signifier is not stable. It's not a stable relationship. Otherwise, the language would not have been a system of symbols. It would have been a literal symbol, where जहाँ आप एक signifier को signified के साथ correlate कर दो, correspondence हो गई, प्रोसेस कंप्लीट हो गया. पर ऐसा नहीं है. द सिग्निफाइड कॉन्स्टेंटली गेट्स रिन्यूड एंड मॉडिफाइड. जैसे कि अगर मैं कहूँ पेन इज माइटियर देन द सोर्ड, हियर आई एम, द आइडिया, कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ द पेन अंडरगोज अ चेंज, एंड नाउ पेन डज नॉट रिमेन एन इंस्ट्रूमेंट, रादर इट बिकम्स it gets associated with power of certain kind, the power to express ideas. It gets associated with the independence and the power of thought, writing. So there is constant, extension and expansion of the signified. If I say that people, the most important need is bread and butter, I am not using the term bread and butter as the real bread and butter. I am using it as livelihood and means of survival. So the signified and signifier, I say, are unstable. Signifier is stable. Signified keeps sliding. It keeps getting renewed. It keeps getting modified. It keeps getting new associations, new connotations. It constantly gets expanded through new meanings in new cultural contexts. So the ability to understand the interrelation to, now cutting the long story short and now coming to the last assumption in Lacanian psychoanalysis, that consciousness and our subjectivity, our social existence is linked with our ability to acquire language as a system of science, to understand the relationship between the signifier and the signified, okay, to constantly negotiate the interplay between the signifier and the signified, and to reach, to obtain, okay, and the ability to understand the meaning by understanding the interplay of the signifier and the signified. So that is why language is not literal but symbolic. Now, all these things are important according to Lacan in the formation of our consciousness. Us now coming back to the idea of schizophrenia. Schizophrenic loses this ability. जो मैंने पहले बात कही थी कि time is language is associated with time, with the notions of past, present, and future. Now, Jameson says that, now I am reading from here, all of this puts us in the position of grasping schizophrenia as the breakdown of the relationship between signifiers. For Lacan, the experience of temporality, human time, past, present, memory, persistence of personal identity over months and years, this existential or experiential feeling of time itself is also the effect of language. So Lacan says language basically works or helps you to understand and acquire the sense of time, temporality, past, present, memory, persistence of personal identity. These are all constituted through language. And schizophrenia is a breakdown of this system, or the inability to acquire this system. Now, since the schizophrenic does not know language articulation in that way, he or she does not have the experience of temporal continuity either, but is condemned to live a perpetual present with which the various moments of his or her past have little connection. So now, how do we apply these ideas to Jameson's notion of schizophrenia, cultural life, cultural experience, and our existence in postmodern times? Now, it is very simple. Jameson says, जैसे pastiche का idea था, how it applies to our cultural life, that we have started producing copies. We have started producing rehashed version of songs. We have started producing sequel after sequel of old movies. Okay, the originality and creativity the notions have undergone complete change today. Today, rehashing, recreating is synonymous with creativity. If you look around yourselves, okay, there is a constant reproduction, recreation of old things in new ways. There is this kind of a strange obsession with producing copies of the earlier works of art. तो कॉपी प्रोड्यूस हो रही इसलिए वो कहता है pastiche. And he uses the term schizophrenia to say that somewhere, now this is the expression I used in the last lecture, the sense of linearity of time has been lost. We are living in the perpetual present. How? There is some kind of hyperactivity associated with the present. You are consuming at a very fast pace. The process of demand and supply, desire and its fulfillment, they have speeded up. There is a fragmentation of the self through the mediation of technology, a person, and also globalization. Okay, so today, rather than the notions of time and place have also become disrupted, because that harmonious and organic connection between past, present, and future has somehow been broken and disrupted. Abhi perpetual present, because present, there is a fixation with present. This is schizophrenia. We seem to have lost the sense of linearity of time, which according to Lacan was produced by language, was a result of language acquisition. So we are living hyperactive lives in the present itself, and that is resulting in some kind of oblivion about the past and the future. So this is what he says, that condemned to live in a perpetual present with which the various moments of his or her past life have little connection. So we now are losing our ability to look at life, our experience, our social life, okay, our existential life as a linear process where जो पहले होता है, that results in the present, and the present flows into the future. We are today, he uses the word condemned, okay, but we can also say that we are subjected to a new kind of existence where the momentary experiences of consumption, of our social expansion of ourselves through technological means has resulted in a hyperactive present. This is described as schizophrenia. So I will just read one more line. In other words, schizophrenic experience is an experience of isolated, disconnected, discontinuous experience, is an discontinuous material signifiers which fail to link up with the coherent sequence. The schizophrenic thus does not know personal identity in our sense, since our feeling of identity depends upon our sense of the persistence of the I and me over time. Okay? So, in the earlier processes of subject formation, I acquires meaning by passing through past, present, and future. Today, I has an excessively obsessive relationship with the present, with the moment, with the momentary experiences. Whether it is satisfying your desires, the need to consume more and more at a given point of time, the need to extend yourself endlessly by watching television, using WhatsApp, being on social media, using Facebook. So there are not one self, but there are multiple selves. This is resulting in, as I said, the loss of the sense of linearity. Whether this is right, wrong, or acceptable or not acceptable, this is for all of us to decide. Obviously, we cannot take these ideas as at face value, as I said. Okay, it is a theoretical intervention by Jameson. which is quite appealing. But whether it is right or wrong, this is for all of us to decide. We cannot blindly and slavishly just accept what we read. On the other hand, the schizophrenic will clearly have a far more intense experience of any given present of the world than we do. And there is an acuteness associated with the past. You are being bombarded by, images, by so much, virtual and real material. So, at the level of perception, at the level of experience, there is an acuteness associated with the present. So it is in short, it is a fixation and obsession with the present. And one more casualty of this loss of linearity is that we seem to have lost the sense of history, historical consciousness, because a lot in the present depended on our understanding of history, and we linked history, the present, and our conception of the future. Second thing, that now he applies this to both social life and to literature and art. When he applies this to literature and art, he says, now let me once again, now he gives two examples. One is from the autobiography of a schizophrenic girl. Second is a very interesting poem by Perelman called China. Okay. If you read, now I am skipping the first example. If you read the poem, okay, the poem actually does not mean anything. And he says that Perelman belongs to a group of writers known as language poets. So, if you read the poem, we live on the third world from the sun. Number 3, nobody tells us what to do. The people who taught us to count were being very kind. It's always time to leave. If it rains, you either have your umbrella or you don't. The wind blows, your hat off. The sun rises also. So this is the poem, and on the next page he reveals that actually this poem was occasioned when the writer was, I'll just quote this from the text. He says, in the present case, the represented object is not really China after all. What happened that Perelman came across a book of photographs in the stationery store in Chinatown. He came across a book of photographs in Chinatown, and the book whose captions and characters obviously remained dead letters, and he couldn't read the book because he was not familiar with the language, so it didn't mean anything to him. He looked at the picture and he supplied captions to the pictures, and all these lines in this poem are the captions that he gave to the various pictures he saw in the book. And this, if it has a meaning, yes, it does have a meaning. Okay. If it has a meaning, the meaning does not emerge from the interrelationship of the signifiers and the signifieds, because it has a literal quality. Okay. It doesn't have that cohesiveness, that coherence, that as I said, the rich interplay of the signifier and the signified. Okay. So the book, the poem is not meaningful in the earlier sense, where you decoded signifiers, linked them with their social meanings, and then arrived at a plausible interpretation of the poem. That doesn't happen here because the poem does not aim to be meaningful in that sense. So, in this kind of a work, signifiers, the terms, are in themselves the purveyors, the vehicles of meaning. And the signifieds do not matter as much as the signifiers do. Okay. So, I just want to read one more line from here, if I can find it. Yet such meaning floats over the text or behind it. The meaning is either prior to the text or after it. It is not an outcome of the text, outcome of reading. One cannot, I think, read this text according to any of the older new critical categories and find the complex inner relationships and texture which characterize the older concrete universal of classical modernism, such as Wallace Stevens. This is how Jameson basically accounts for the changes in our social and cultural experience and links it to schizophrenia. Okay? That both in our personal experience and in our social experience, as far as our sense of identity is concerned, our sense of self is concerned, our self-conception is concerned, okay, there is a change. The change can be described as schizophrenia because it involves losing the sense of linearity of time. Okay, our sense of past has been affected to a certain extent by a very hyperactive and psychedelic present. So much so that we seem to have lost our sense of history also. The present has become so fixating. So with this, we will end. This was our last part of the discussion. And please.